is really wonderful to meet you all after the long day of work. I think the fag end of the week, but I'll make it very light, simple and short. So anytime you can just stop me to ask any clarification that you want. As Ashok put it rightly, one thing possibly which he had left out is that as far as maritime is concerned, it has always been given a stepsisterly treatment kind of, because possibly people think it is too technical or it is too international, or maybe it's so many things that it involves. So when it comes to maritime arbitration, we find that there are not many players in India, or especially when Chennai is going to be such a favorable port. We ought to have had more maritime arbitrations. We don't seem to be doing much on maritime, and even Indian lawyers feel very happy to fly across the oceans to arbitrate on maritime, because ultimately what happens is that some other venue is chosen for arbitration. So what happens is that something really important gets missed out, and as whether it is filling the purses or not, I think it's a very nice, interesting subject that everybody would have to go into, and also see the scope of how it is. I think all of us are very young enough to learn new laws and new rules, regulations kind of thing. So I think it is sort of great education, and I learn every day. I learn on maritime because I specialize only in maritime, so I keep learning each and every day. So even sometimes the opinion I give 1 year ago is not the same one I give today, because there's been some change, some law, some different regulation which has come. But when it comes to maritime law, like I say, I didn't choose law, law chose me. And similarly, I didn't choose maritime law to practice, but since I took a post-graduation on international law and constitutional law, where the law of the sea was there, I was sort of fascinated with that law. I thought, why not? So that has led me both on academic, my academic qualifications also, and my practice. So it is only again incidental that I chose maritime. So, and as Ashok said, I could also find my law. God chose my partner in maritime too. So with Vijay, it has been a touchwood. It has been a good innings. So sea has been a source of sustenance for many, and especially the marine industry. So it's just not with respect to the natural resources or the availability of various resources, but the fact that many disputes, many litigations and arbitrations occur relating to the sea has given more importance to the field of maritime law. And when we do say maritime, it is not necessarily that we talk about international maritime. There are lots of aspects which, even on a domestic national level, that we deal with arbitration, which is something which I thought I would just highlight upon, so that there's going to be food for every lawyer to think about it on those terms. So how is it that you demarcate international and national, and how, on what aspects you talk about intranational is what we talk about, or rather we need to know about. That will be much more easier. So that is going to be a food for thought for many lawyers. Now, basically, who decides this arbitration, or what is it in maritime arbitration? Because we know maritime is something related to shipping, related to the sea. So there are going to be so many players who are related to the sea who are going to play a major role in any kind of arbitration issues that we are going to deal with. So who decides it? Is the maritime industry. They decide what kind of, or how the arbitration, or how their disputes will have to get resolved. So what happens is that, how is it that, why is it that we are not able to highlight on many important aspects of maritime arbitration today is because possibly these marine industries are not properly led. They are not informed about what kind of developments that we have under Indian law and what does India talk about maritime, and whether the maritime laws and legislations in India are at par with other countries and on an international angle. So there's many issues which have not been gone into by the industry, which sometimes results in the wrong choosing of arbitration. And maybe there are few disadvantages which we might have in India with respect to litigation or arbitration, but I would say personally, they have no relevance at all when it actually comes to resolving the disputes between two commercial bodies. Because still, as the saying goes, the commercial bodies still want to continue their relationship, not breaking each other. Because let us say, when we talk about the maritime industry today, and we are talking about carriage of goods by sea, there are many lines that you can rely on. Because when you talk about certain commodities, it's only one or two particular lines who are competing with each other. So that being the case, it becomes very much necessary that these two competing lines also have something similar to kind of the laws that they have to adopt. So always going to Singapore, always going to London is not going to solve their issue when their dispute is going to be in India or Sri Lanka or some of the eastern countries. So ultimately, of course, this is something which we do keep teaching the industry because, as I was just telling, I love talking, and I love talking in a very positive way, kind of. So we do have a lot of seminars conducted in the marine industry to loop in people to say, choose India. We also kind of tell them we come in very attractive packages. We do try to tell them, saying that, like how I sell law to people who are interested, I also try to sell maritime arbitrations to India. Usually that is one of the topics that we discuss about, because India enjoys a wonderful coastal line, and definitely when it comes to law, the kind of input that we put in each and every litigation or arbitration and research especially is much more than any law firm that you can find in UK or US. In fact, since I represent most of the P&I clubs, there are also certain instances where the opinion is always sought from an Indian lawyer before they hand over the dispute to a P&I club lawyer, before they do that. Because with a clear perspective, these opinions are being furnished. So, how is it that these maritime disputes are resolved through arbitration? Site of arbitration. So when it comes to arbitration agreement or arbitration clause in a maritime, where the arbitration has to be conducted is chosen by the parties. Of course, maybe all these things are similar to all kinds of arbitration. But with maritime industry, it is global in nature. So they have varied choices. In many international contracts, let us say, there are two parties who are involved. The kind of arbitration clause generally in these commercial contracts would either be party A or party B. But in maritime, what we find is party A contracts with party B to do services in place C. The arbitration is to be conducted as per the law in place D. The jurisdiction is going to be in place E. So we have so many issues, so many laws involved, and definitely maritime law or maritime arbitration is the source of private international law. Some of you do remember the public international law, private international law papers that we would have attempted in our law course. This is where we actually apply private international law. So there are going to be so many venues, so many sites that are chosen. So the site of arbitration is one thing which the parties chose. What are the things which make them choose a particular site? Can be many, because maritime industry being very unique or specialized, they would want to find persons who are well known in that industry. Possibly the arbitrators come from there. Then of course, what are the applicable laws there? And the third, cost. So these are the things which make the arbitrants in maritime industry choose a particular side. And scope of arbitration. Now, it's not like always they have a printed clause and they take into account all the kind of disputes and things like that. The parties choose which issue will go to arbitration, which issues will not go to arbitration. So what happens is that they are very clear about what can be handled by arbitration and what other we can resolve or what other we go to courts kind of. So this to a large extent minimizes or sometimes expands the scope of arbitration. Procedure. Now procedure is also decided. If it is going to be a common arbitration clause which says that applicable law, then naturally the procedure is adopted. But we always moot as maritime lawyers, we always moot for one particular type of institutionalized arbitration, because that helps the arbitrants, the parties to an arbitration, to systemize, to have a uniformity with respect to the procedure that has got to be adopted. So in maritime, we always talk about institutionalized arbitration, which is much more easier to have a control over the procedure. And who can be arbitrators? Now, most of the maritime arbitrators say no to retired judiciary, because they want people from the trade or somebody who is in regular touch with the maritime aspects of law. Because let us say the issue of arbitration is going to be running to crows. Their issue might be one minuscule, which will possibly take about 3 arbitration hearings to resolve. So they want somebody who will just go to the crux of the issue, find out which party has got, like for example, it can be on issues like ladies or demurrage charges or detention charges or storage charges. The issue involved is so minuscule, but the amount involved will run to crores kind of and millions. So they want, mostly they prefer arbitrators who are from the line, but we are also now trying to state that it is just not arbitration, though they might be very knowing with respect to the technicalities of maritime law when it comes to application, when it comes to the procedures, when it comes to execution of an award and things like that, how to write an award also. On those aspects, we might require some judicial intervention. So there's a scope for that in kind of who can be arbitrators. And makeup of an arbitration award. Most of the arbitrators now, even during representation before the arbitrators, are very clear about what kind of award they want. They don't want, a well-spread 50-page award. They want issues to be dealt with very precisely, and practical aspects of the issues put in the arbitration, with no speculation, with no interpretation required on a later date. Like for example, I'm not just talking about interest part of it or expenses during arbitration, those things which all arbitrators do. But the award, as to the applicability of the award also, they want to be very clear about it. So when they choose or refer to arbitration, both parties are very clear about what kind of course they would be spelling out what should be written in an award, but they are very clear about saying what kind of issues need to be dealt with and what the arbitrator should speak upon. Okay, because ultimately it's not a court that they go for, and it's a choice of the arbitrants or the parties. So what happens is that when they make a request for an arbitration, their prayer also is very precise, unlike like how we usually put, one encompassive prayer and pass such other orders as the Honorable Tribunal may deem fit. No, nothing like that. They're very clear about it. So, in fact, they're very precise about what kind of award has to be made in that particular dispute. And remedies available. Now we find that in ordinary arbitrations, what we do is, for interim reliefs, what kind of interim reliefs we go to court for, whether we get an arbitration suspended, whether despite the fact that we have an arbitration, can we go to the courts for interim reliefs. So many issues are there. And this kind of arbitrations can happen with, national and international also to an extent if it is a recurring arbitration. But when it comes to maritime arbitration, it's slightly different from any other kind of arbitration, because we are dealing with vessels which are always in the mode. And the speciality about maritime is, the principle is called the floating island theory, where the vessel sails with the law. So let us say it's going to be a Panama vessel. The laws of Panama inside the vessel is what is going to be applicable. So unless and until you're very clear about what kind of arbitration clause that you have, what kind of remedies that might be available or not available. So what happens is that this aspect of risk always makes maritime a little bit more interesting and distinguishing in nature. And cost and execution, of course. So even while entering into an arbitration or a pre-arbitration stage, whether they want to have a pre-arbitration or an agreement pre-arbitration, in such issues also what happens is that the cost and execution of the awards which would be passed will be taken into account. So now we are striking at players of marine industry who are very well sure of what they want, because again in this one particular factor, maritime law differs from many other fields of practice. A vessel, let us say we get an arrest warrant in a vessel or a stay or an injunction. If the vessel has to keep berthing in a port for 1 day, we are talking about again lakhs and crores of rupees, which is going to be wasted. So let us say the ship is going to be arrested for a week or 10 days or 15 days. You might as well completely forget about having the vessel released from arrest or resynced, because the cost is going to be very prohibitive. And next comes the issue of, while under arrest, who becomes responsible for this particular arrest, or who is going to bear the cost. Previously what happened was, India was not considered as a very favorable, it was considered as a favorable forum for arrest, but it was never considered as a favorable forum with respect to release, in the sense whether for illegal arrest of vessels, can the plaintiff who moves the court can be sued. So what happened was, in many issues when arrest warrants were obtained, even for trivial matters, vessel gets arrested. In fact, I usually quote about Mumbai case where for 2 lakhs the vessel was arrested, for just 2 lakhs. But the time taken to contact the owners, tell them that the vessel has been arrested for 2 lakhs, and to have the payment, I don't know, it was completely prohibitive. You understand? So what happens? Because they could not ultimately trace who the owners were, because it was on charter, subcharter, subcharter, subcharter by the time. And usually, as you know, we file the cases as owners and parties interested in a particular vessel. So who is this owner, who is this party who is interested? Definitely the party who files a suit is not aware of. But ultimately to communicate, and it's very easy to communicate an order, because you arrest a vessel, you just go to the concerned port to have the arrest warrant issued, so that doesn't sail away. So these kind of practical problems have, to a large extent, taken a very important, very important criteria into concern as to whether the party who gets illegal arrest, whether that party can be sued. So, but in India, slowly that concept is also coming. So now we will know that unless and until you have, of course, it's 2 ways of looking at it. One is that the lawyers don't advise arrest unless and until their clients have a good case for it. The bench is also very vigilant. They don't give an arrest unless and until the plaintiff fully explains with respect to whether this arrest was really necessary or not. So, I think now India is also slowly coming at par with many other jurisdictions. So that is going to be one thing which is going to assist us in promoting maritime arbitration. Now, when you talk about interim reliefs, the main principle that one needs to look into is that we can't, in maritime law or maritime arbitration, completely say, okay, it's only arbitration or in courts. There has to be a coordination between the courts and the arbitration tribunal. So the litigation and arbitration aspect of it has to go hand in hand. Because for So interim release like arrest, you can't get it before an arbitrator. So you have to go to the concerned jurisdiction or the court, high court which is there in order to get a interim relief. But when it comes to arbitration, it can be localized anywhere. So the vessel would be in some other place, but the arbitration, let's say the vessel is sailing in some of the coast of India on the way, and it's getting arrested. The court which is going to have jurisdiction is going to be an Indian court because the arrest is there. But when it comes to arbitration, the clause talks about some other place completely away, miles away from where it is. A different law, different application, different procedure. So what happens is that first thing which has got to, when it comes to interim relief, is that there has to be some coordination between the courts and the arbitration. But of course, with UNCITRAL and the maritime codes that we have presently, there seems to be a fair number of judicial decisions and precedents which assist the courts also. And of course, it also becomes the responsibility of the bar to tell the bench as to what is the latest law which has got to be updated. So this is one field where there's going to be an assurance is there for both to travel together. Interim reliefs determine resolving the entire dispute at an early stage. I don't know how many people are aware, as maritime lawyers, when we have a dispute for a client, it's very rare that we go to the trial stage. Because once we have a vessel arrest, immediately people are coming in to have the issue resolved. So at the earliest point of time, issues get resolved. Now, whether this issue is really a dispute or not is something to be resolved in an arbitration, but the fact that there is an issue, it has got the concern of the parties involved, and the courts also think it is to be resolved, takes the precedence. So if the courts coordinate with the type of the issue which comes, in all probability the issue gets resolved at the earliest point. Now, I don't think I'm speaking much for arbitration, right? So let me just move on. So when we cross over the small hurdles, we have got a very big cake which is waiting for us. That is arbitration. Now, what are the kind of the interim reliefs that one can seek in arbitration? I'll just be brief about it. One is preservation of assets. So what are the assets which the owners have? It can be in the form of the vessel, paraphernalia, the equipment, etc. Or it can be goods, because not always when a party goes to the court to seek an interim relief, it has got its own cargo alone in the particular vessel. So it has also got other cargo, assets of other parties, third parties there. Complaints of an interim award. So what happens is that since there is going to be an arbitration clause, sometimes the arbitrators assist the arbitrants to go to the court also to pass an interim award. There what happens is the arbitrator acts more like a jurist assisting the court in order to have the parties, the disputes between the parties resolved. So that is possible. Preventing removal of property from the jurisdiction. Now, the courts can intervene and give any interim relief only when the rest is in its jurisdiction. So, how to stop or how to prevent the property, particular property being removed? Or if at all, it has got to be taken, in whose custody would that possibly be, so that further reliefs can be given. Something which is to be taken up. Ensuring participation in arbitration. No courts intervene when there is an arbitration clause, but they come and pass directions and orders only for the interim relief, clearly mentioning that the parties would have to go to arbitration to resolve their dispute. So far we have not found many courts, especially in India, saying no, despite the arbitration clause, come on, I'm taking the jurisdiction and I'm going to have the issues resolved. So that way we find that the courts always give precedence to arbitration in case there is a clause there. Ensuring enforceability of the award. That is also an aspect which is to be taken into account, because if suppose there is a possibility or there is a iota of doubt whether after the dispute gets resolved, the party, namely the owner or the other party, would not be in a position to pay, either for the damages and the loss or for the cost involved in arbitration. So enforceability of the award would also be taken into account. So in maritime law, all these things amongst others are also taken into account. Now, what do you mean by res? Res is actually the thing which we talk about in a maritime dispute. That is the vessel. So when we talk about res, usually it is an attachment of the res because it's floating, it's moving around. So that being the case, it becomes very necessary that whenever we talk about any maritime issue, maritime law on carriage or whatever it is, the vessel is taken into account and the attachment of the vessel. So what kind of orders can be passed, what cannot be, what comes within the port, concerned jurisdiction or not is decided. But the two different laws that we do decide here, which is not usually available in many arbitrations, is the interim proceedings and in personam proceedings. When you say interim proceedings, it means against the entire world. So it's not required for a party to go and find the particular person in order to sue him, or go to that particular party to say that he has caused a loss. If suppose his goods have been damaged, he has lost the value of his goods, he can generally file any legal action in rem in order to seek. But once it is found that this particular party has caused the damage, then this in rem proceedings gets converted to in personam and the proceedings go on. So usually what happens is that for interim relief, it is an interim proceeding. And once there is an arbitration clause and we know who the parties involved are, from whom it has to be recorded, it becomes an in personam. So the cause title accordingly varies from in rem proceedings to in personam proceedings. Am I making anybody sleepy? No? Otherwise I will sing some small tune in between. Okay, now the arbitration clause. Now this is our favorite subject, we love to talk about this. So do we have so many things with respect to maritime. When Ashok told me 45 minutes, 1 hour, I was just blinking. I said, what should I talk about? So many things to talk, so many issues. So please do point out in case I have missed out a few things on it. But I'm trying to be very precise or very brief, trying to put every one small line I could think of so that it can give more food for thought. It provides an answer for all kinds of eventualities. So when it comes to maritime, rarely parties, especially the trade, wants to litigate. They want to go to arbitration and all their issues are eventually decided by having a proper arbitration clause. Now, it can broaden or narrow the scope of arbitration tribunal, provide suitable measures by proper application, so there is no scope for different interpretation. So it lies in the maker of an agreement, the drafter of this agreement, to have a clause which fulfills all these things. That is, whether you want the arbitration for a small issue or for a larger issue, and whether you want what kind of relief measures that you need to fit into that particular resolving of dispute, and of course finally there should be no two ways of interpretation, because as lawyers we love this word interpretation and we love to interpret it in the word we want. But always when we fight in courts, it's only with respect to Indian perspective, how Indian law interprets in this way, that way, this court, that court, and ultimately a Supreme Court judgment to override it. But when it comes to interpretation in a maritime law, we are not talking about one law or one legislation or whatever. We are talking about so many laws involved. So the issue starts with which would be the applicable law, and that's going to take years to resolve. So the less number of contradictions, less number of clauses which can counter each other, and more precisely less scope for interpretation would be a proper clause for the particular contract. If the arbitration clause does not speak about interim reliefs, then the rights for resolving the disputes are shared by the courts and arbitration tribunals. I think that we discussed. So we need to have applicable law and jurisdiction in such laws and such countries where we can have favorable coordination of the courts and the arbitration tribunal. Opting for alternate dispute resolution method. This is one particular aspect that many fail upon. Thinking like one arbitration clause is sufficient to choose between litigation and arbitration, so all the clients are going to come to them for an arbitration. No. The maritime industry is not interested in going to courts or to arbitration. All they want is for their issue to be resolved. There's no ego there. It's not, 10 feet passage that two neighbors want to fight about. They always want issues to be resolved fast and quick at less cost. So what happens is that this gives more scope for other kinds of alternate dispute resolution. Of course, I'll just have a slide on it, so I'll run through it when I come to it. Then is to direct tribunal to address the interim issues, and if it is not formed, then the courts can determine some in pro tem manner. So let us say, if already there is an arbitration tribunal already set in the contract or the arbitration clause, no issues. They can go seek their reliefs. If it's something which an arbitrator cannot give or a tribunal cannot give, then they know. But let us say there are instances mostly where it takes time to form an arbitration tribunal. So in such case, what happens is that the parties would necessarily go to the court in order to seek the interim relief so that from there on they can proceed. Courts do not usurp but promote effective application of arbitration clause and also protect the interest of the maritime players. I think in my reasonable period of about 3 decades, I find that not many courts want to usurp in case there is going to be an arbitration. But of course, which courts have got jurisdiction to talk on arbitration, that I can talk about, because whether this court has got jurisdiction or that courts have got jurisdiction to say about this arbitration clause is something gives us a lot of matter to talk about. But usually, when it is courts which serve as an arbitration tribunal or an arbitration clause, usually the courts say, let's say with the parties, they have already decided that they would refer it to arbitration. So, no issues about it. Yeah, now, this is something which, especially you are thinking about your purse or your knowledge that you should talk about. Because this is where that we will be making the extra penny. Whether, not only that, you also know your scope, whether the penny is going to come to us. We are all in this, lawyer fraternity. We are glad if our brother and sister gets an extra penny. But is it coming to us or not is something which we should talk about, because we are going to be even more glad if it is going to come to us, right? So this is what actually gives the bread butter to the lawyers to determine what kind of arbitration is there in maritime field. Charter parties. Of course, what's a charter party? I will talk about it. Charter party is the first kind of contract which is entered into by a ship owner who owns a ship, who gives his vessel to on hiring basis or leases it out to another party who is called a charterer, and the contract that they enter into is verbose. Of course, I usually tell my clients jokingly, because most of the charter parties or bills of lading, it's all minuscule. It's on the back side. Totally the paper of a bill of lading is in two, like butter paper. The back side it contains terms, minimum about 29 to 30 clauses. Very, very nicely they printed in yellow color, light grey color. And whenever I tell them, why don't you give me a enlarged copy, they say, I don't know where it got printed, madam, it's going to take time. And every time I read a bill of lading, I'd say, if I'm going to lose my eyesight on it, I'm going to sell my, my eye doctor's bill to you, kind of. But charter parties and bills of lading are the source of this arbitration, source of the clauses which determine what kind of disputes can be addressed by the parties, either if there's an arbitration before a tribunal or not. And of course, bill of lading comes next to a charter party because it can be under a charter party or it can be independent without a charter party, where the vessel owner directly deals with the trader to carry his particular cargo from one place to another. As as far as this charter parties and bills of lading are concerned, we'll find that most of these contracts are not done in India. So it's usually the ship owner and the charterer and also the master of the vessel who has his crew set to sail the vessel, who issues the bill of lading. So what happens is that the terms and conditions of this charter party and bill of lading usually lies with them. Of course, necessarily it doesn't mean in them. They also have a panel, they have lawyers, they have other participants in the trade. But ultimately what happens is this charter parties and bills of lading, if they are not made in India, it's slightly difficult for us to pull jurisdiction to India. Now third comes the multimodal transportation. Now first and second, charter party and bills of lading, you will find that arbitration is optional. But most of the parties have an arbitration clause in a charter party. Bill of lading, it's very optional because there are about a dozen bills of lading, dozen different types of bills of lading. So some have arbitration, some do not have. But bill of lading is one particular document which gives title to a particular cargo. It has got three important functions. One is that it confers title to the person who holds it. And second is that it is a receipt of cargo. That means that when I send a cargo from India and hand it over to a carrier, once I give the cargo to him, he gives me the bill of lading. It means that he has received my cargo. So it's a receipt. And third, it evidences the terms and conditions of the bill of lading, right? So what are the terms he agrees to, he cannot agree, etc. is contained there. Next comes the multimodal transportation. Now multimodal transportation means there is more than one leg in the transport. So if it is only sea, then you have a bill of lading which is issued. But let us say sea is combined with air, road or rail. Let us say it comes from one nook and corner of one particular city, it comes to the port, and from port to another port, from there an inland transportation. So what happens is, usually the document which is issued is multimodal transportation. So we have some work there, because definitely it can be a place, it can be a container full of garments going from Tirupur, or it can be coffee going from one remote village near Mangalore or some other place in Karnataka. So what happens is that there is already a road transportation or a rail transportation before the sea leg comes. Similarly, the cargo is meant to be delivered to one party who is in inland, so there can be a road transport, or sometimes even airlifting is possible. This multimodal transportation gives a lot of scope for different kinds of mode in which it can be carried. Now why this is because if it is going to be a shipment which is going to go from India, we have an act called the Multimodal Transportation Act which would be applicable, where the arbitration is statutory, so you have no options. MTD is there, you have an arbitration clause, then you have to arbitrate on it. So we are coming to our goal, right? So how many, by end of this lecture, I want each and everybody start thinking how many arbitrations I am going to get in 2019. By the way, Sunita Sundar promised, I think I should at least have 10 to 15 arbitrations. And Ashok has already taken his pocket book and started writing. Every month I am getting 10 arbitrations for my, okay? I wish all the very best to all of you, and it's going to be really wonderful if Chennai and India is going to be a place mooting maritime arbitration. That day is coming, definitely. But when that day comes, we need to have all of us have to be equipped to handle it, right? So that's what we are doing now. We are getting ourselves equipped for that particular day where we are going to have a lot of arbitrations to do. So what happens is this is statutory, mandatory. So in multimodal transportation, we already have an arbitration clause. Even if you say I don't want it, you can't have it, because the Act compulsorily has an arbitration. Now agency contracts. So it's not just a carriage where arbitrations are there in the, amongst the industry. We have agencies. All not many Indian vessels are sailing in international waters, so we always have only foreign ships sailing. All foreign owners, all foreign vessels would have to necessarily have an Indian agent to take care of the statutory formalities. So whether it be customs or whether it be port or whether it be any other authorities, survey, nitrate, whatever it is, or it can be a CFS, whatever, ICD, whatever may be the role that is to be played, you need to have an agent acting in India to represent them. Because none of the statutory authorities recognize a foreign owner. So necessarily they are going to have agency agreements where possibly the principal can come out with his own agent or engage an agent in India to take care of the work and the services. So here also we have arbitration clauses. So we need to moot that. But maybe again the venue and things like that would be the place which would be opted by the principal. But there is still scope for it. Then universal contracts. Universal contracts means, like, let us say the principal, this is one particular, if suppose the agent is in India, we can have Indian arbitration clause. But let us say universal contract, there will be one principal having so many agents all over the world. So what happens is that in such cases, it is very less that we can intervene, because in such cases, they would insist on the principal place of business of the owner or the principal ship owner who would want to have his own clause, arbitration clause there. Then domestic transportations or domestic transport. Like I said, if it's going to be transport, road transport or whatever it is, or it's going to be rail transport which is not at privatized, so it's going to be the Sanco or Born-Lorry who have their own rail service. We can have arbitration resolving these kind of domestic transactions. Here we have lots of scope for Indian applicability, because it's going to be, cargoes are going to be moved in trucks, on road, on trains, air traffic, etc. So what happens is that overall, if we see, there is scope for different kinds of arbitration at various levels. Not much of maritime involved in agency contracts or universal contract or domestic transactions. But when it comes to even multimodal transportation, not much of maritime law would be involved, but all these things are commercial transactions. But the only difference is, like, we would have run through the pages of our Arbitration and Conciliation Act so many times, right? Those who practice on it, they would have. But those who are interested in it, please do. The concept of whether it is going to be national or international is something which we need to look into. If suppose the contract is entered into with a foreign company, then automatically it becomes an international commercial arbitration. So we are mooting maritime arbitration. Whether it's going to be national or international is something which we can resolve. So what happens is that whether it is, but in today's industry, practically in a year, whether an arbitration is national or international, for those kind of simple issues also, we find lawyers are not equipped. I had a heavy matter in Kolkata for about 7 crores and 10 crores, where the respondents, 2 of the respondents were not Indian companies. Right, Roy, this applicant files a case in Kolkata High Court for appointment of an arbitrator. When very clearly he knows, he even mentions it in this petition saying that they are a foreign company having this place of business, but chooses Kolkata. So these kind of errors, this is what I say, equipping oneself as to what would be the proper jurisdiction is something you can, because as a maritime lawyer, even I would like to go to the merits of the case and fight it and not tell my client in one line, sorry, this petition is going to get dismissed. In fact, we engaged a local lawyer to take care of the day-to-day hearings, because we can't rush to Kolkata for each and every hearing. And practically, I think I just went only once for this matter. If there had been more on merits, we will feel justified about addressing a particular point. But these kind of things, and ultimately what happened is we withdrew the case. After so much arguments we put on one day, because once we start arguing, we just don't talk on one point. No? Again, going back to the issue of when you have an audience, how interested we are in talking. So we have 10 points, at least put 8 points through. Though the case could have been won in 1 point, kind of. So what happened was that after the first argument, the party was so convinced that this judge is not going to pass any order for the appointment of an arbitrator. And most interestingly, when it comes to an international commercial arbitration, who can be an arbitrator is also an issue that you need to think about. So it is just not national, international and things like that. We are going to do an international commercial arbitration. What are the applicable laws, principles, provisions should also be looked at. Hope I'm not shooting. Please, sir, please put all your cards up in case I'm going beyond this time scope. To understand the scope of maritime arbitration, the aforesaid transactions need to be understood. All complexities arise there. So, like maritime lawyers, or if you're going to be international arbitrators, or even assisting international arbitrators, or whatever it is, we need to be very clear about what is arbitration and what is maritime about it. So, these transactions, whether it comes to maritime arbitration or not, or is it some issue which has to be locally dealt with? Because it can be a case of delayed delivery resulting in payment of additional costs by way of detention or duty payable to the customs, which can always be localized. So whether it is going to be an arbitration on international angle or domestic angle has to be. So this kind of complications and complexities has to be there in. This is really food for maritime lawyers to see whether it can be interpreted in their favor and what has to be applied, what kind of law has to be applied. Now, as I said, what is a charter party? It is a deal between a ship owner and a trader for the hire of a ship and the delivery of the cargo. So both comes in together, and a group of people using a hired aircraft for ship. There are predominantly 3 different types of charter parties. One is for a particular period of time. One is for a particular voyage. The other one is called a demise or a bareboat charter party, where it is slightly mostly entered into when it is not specific to a particular time or a voyage that they want. So to appreciate the complexities associated with shipping, the role of the basic documents used in the ocean carrier, charter parties and goods of lading need to be understood so that the fundamentals associated with arbitration can be dealt with. So now I don't think you're all in the mood for me to go further on charter parties and bills of lading. I'll just go on with respect to arbitration. This is a very important aspect. Every ship owner agrees to carry a cargo from one place to another because he gets a freight for it. He gets money for it. So this freight are basically the contracts which are entered into by a ship owner predominantly in a carriage. These are called the contracts of affreightment. From this affreightment, only all other rights are generally born. Agreements to employ vessels to transport goods. So in these agreements also, we find that there is a lot of scope for arbitration. It can be a charter party when the ship owner leases the entire vessel to a single party for a private carriage. So one particular charterer or one particular party can lease out the entire vessel in order to move his cargo. So it can be a project cargo. Like for example, we have lots of project shipments for construction of roads where materials go from here to UAE or some part of those countries. So let us say 13 times, 15 times. So what happens is the entire vessel is taken on voyage basis or on a time basis or a period of time where raw materials are being exported. So this all comes as to whether this is going to be a private carriage or not. But usually when there are going to be several cargoes meant for different consignees shipped by the different shippers, a bill of lading is given. So it can be a bill of lading when vessel carries goods as common carriers using partial capacities for particular shippers. Nowadays actually we maritime arbitrators also have less number of cases because with the development, what happens is that with containerization, what happens is many kind of disputes have got reduced. Okay. I'm not getting focused, is it? No problem. Next, complications. What are complications? If bills of lading are used on chartered vessels, because master of the vessel issues bills of lading at the request of the charterers. So usually it's like we have two documents. We have a charter party and we also have a bill of lading for the same cargo. Because the master of the vessel chooses to give another bill of lading for the same cargo which is under a charter. In such cases, bills of lading are contracts of carriage between the vessel and the consignees named the bill. So the ship owner is not involved in the bill of lading. The charter issues the bill of lading through the master, and this bill of lading will determine the rights of the parties with respect to the cargo. And consignees are not bound by the charter terms for which they have no notice. So what happens in the bill of lading? The parties who enters the cargo is not aware that it is under a charter party. So what is there in the charter party, whether there is an arbitration clause, how it is got to be resolved, these people do not know. So what happens is that law says you don't know something, forget it. It's a fact which you are not aware of. What fact you are aware of will go. So they go only by the bill of lading which has been issued by the master of the vessel. Next. When bills of lading are issued under charter parties, so these are typical cases where when a bill of lading is issued, it refers to a charter party. So this kind of cargo, bills of lading will be for commingled cargo, project cargoes, reefer containers, where cargo have to be kept in a particular temperature to be carried, or it can be bulk cargo when it is carried in bulk, not in containerized cargo, etc. They do not operate as new contracts between ship owners and charterers because there is already a charter party and the bill of lading refers to it. So bill of lading will not be treated separately. It will become part and parcel of the first contract. They are receipts that do not modify charter provisions. So irrespective of whatever provisions you have in a bill of lading, if a charter party is there, the charter party will take precedence. Let's all go back to our college days where we think about what contract is entered into first, whether that would be the major contract or the primary contract, after which a secondary contract is entered into. These kind of situations you might not find in ordinary arbitrations. Possibly in construction contracts you might, because there is a major a contract under which several other subcontracts are entered into. But this is commonplace in maritime law. So what kind of contract is entered into needs to be ascertained. Charters transfer the goods and also issue bills of lading to comply with sales requirements. So what happens is, simple charter party is not sufficient, they have to have a bill of lading. So the charters issue that bill of lading to transfer the goods. When bills of lading are transferred to valued third parties, they become contracts. So this peculiar thing about a bill of lading is that it's a negotiable document. So whoever holds it becomes the owner of the cargo. So he might issue it to me, I will endorse it and give it to Anand, and he will give it to Ashok, he'll give it to Balaji. So ultimately who owns that bill of lading will be the owner of the cargo. So all these contracts are separate contracts, subcontracts under this bill of lading. So those things also matter. So the ultimate consignee cannot say I was not aware of the original bill of lading or I was not aware of the charter party, because it's a sequence of contracts, change of contracts. The initial primary contract would still hold good. Then they are independent of the charter party except for charter provisions expressly incorporated in the bill. So if in the bill of lading there is the word charter party, then all the terms will be automatically implied. Holders of bill of lading who are strangers to the charter party should be able to rely on bills of lading and be free from agreements between ship owners and charters. So this is how the courts have held, saying that if a bill of lading is issued and they do not know about the charter party, please don't trouble them with those terms and conditions. Just go by the terms and conditions for which they have agreed to transport the goods. The necessity of consulting charters make charter party bills more cumbersome than most negotiable instruments, because when you put a charter party, it is between a ship owner and a charterer who takes it for a long period of time, whereas bills of lading are all, depends on the carriage time only. So it can be for few hours, or it can be few days, or at the most 1 month, 1.5 months, that's all. Whereas charter parties are done for years together sometimes, because if it's going to be a time charter for a year, 2 years, so that becomes the predominant one. So the clauses are going to be really cumbersome. Why are we bothered about all those things? But ultimately, if we need to know that there is a charter, then you will have to know what the terms are. Many charter parties contain mandatory arbitration clauses. These clauses are important in international maritime disputes. That's of course sure. Well, it's a bill of lading might not concur. If suppose a charter party contains an arbitration, necessarily that would hold good. Okay. They permit courts to compel arbitration without the parties being present. So this is one thing which need to take into account, whether the parties are before the court or not. If the word arbitration is available in a contract, automatically that rules over litigation. Jurisdictional consent is found in arbitration clause, because we know there can be so many jurisdictions involved, so many laws involved, so we need to know whether this particular jurisdiction is acceptable to the other party before it can go on. Then wide scope for arbitration clause. A party to the charter may enforce arbitration against another party if the dispute falls within the terms of the arbitration clause. I think this is common for all kinds of arbitration. Law is not very unique when it comes to maritime. But only those who have agreed to arbitrate can be forced to go for the said arbitration clause. This is where lawyers have a lot of work. Like, as I always say, it's like, arbitrants are like, or let me put it, even lawyers are like kids. They don't want rice, they don't want rice. They don't want brinjal, they don't want brinjal. Parties say, look, I know there's an arbitration clause, but I don't want to go for arbitration. It can be done. It is possible in maritime law because of the complexities that we have. So what happens is that you can't force one to go to an arbitration if they don't want to. So comes the question of whether the arbitration clause can be interpreted to include a party who is not interested, who is not informed, who is not referred to an arbitration to go to. This is where we have, so it's something like the parties decide to resolve an issue, it can be resolved. The parties don't want to resolve it, then they can drag it for years together. So ultimately, arbitration comes of choice, comes out of option taken by the parties. And of course, we're all very diligent lawyers. We'll always assist the parties to go to courts, but sometimes it happens like we have to lay down the law. There might be an arbitration clause, but it might not be applicable to our client. So those lawyers who promote arbitration but still go to courts and say there is no arbitration clause should all be pardoned, because they want to do it in the eyes of law like laying the law, not for any other reason, right? Because we have to be law abiding, so we do it only because the law says that one cannot be forced to arbitration and not that we are against arbitration, right? Now, shippers, consignees or holders of bills are not parties to the charter party have no obligation to arbitrate unless a charter arbitration clause is incorporated in the bill of lading. It's more like implied. So the charter party has a has an arbitration clause, and the bill of lading incorporates it automatically. You have an arbitration clause included in the bill of lading. Generally, charter arbitration clauses are incorporated into bills of lading when the bill clearly refers to the charter and the holder of the bill becomes aware of the incorporation by actual or constructive notice. So this is where again the scope comes. The lawyers, we lawyers who do not want arbitration for our client, is this constructive notice. Whether there is actually, the bill of lading contains the charter clauses and the parties know there is an arbitration, or constructively know about it. If they know about it, then arbitration would prevail. Otherwise, the parties can come out and say, sorry, we have no knowledge of that particular fact of arbitration. The incorporation clause should specify the date. What is the slide number? Sorry. It doesn't show? Forget. No. The incorporation clause should specify the date and place where the charter was signed and by whom. So this is a very important aspect. Not just an arbitration clause and incorporation clause, but it should specify the date in which the charter party was entered into and who were the parties who signed to the charter party. So unless and until you know that, the question of having an incorporation clause would not suffice if you want to have arbitration. Some courts find incorporation fails when the name and the date of the charter is left blank in the incorporation clause. To add to the confusion, some courts hold that an incorporation clause is effective even though it fails to name the signatories or date and place of execution. This is of course the discretionary orders which are passed by the courts, whether the courts want to encourage arbitration or not. Some hold that unless and until everything is specified, you can't go to arbitration, whereas some hold like even if says refers to, it's sufficient enough. You could be prudent enough to call for it and know the incorporation. Many incorporation clauses are confusing and courts must resolve their incorporation issue. We need to have a uniform law, which we'll never have. So more scope for lawyers again. So either we have work in an arbitration or we have work related to arbitration in a court. Both are okay with you, right? Yes. So we have a lot of business, don't we? Next slide, please. This is very simple case where you compare a charter party and a bill of lading. I'll just run through it. That's it. This case involves a cargo claim on a shipment from Spain to New Jersey. This happened in New York. The New York court held this. The plaintiff bill of lading holder purchased a cargo shipped under a charter containing a London arbitration clause. Now, this got nothing. It's going from Spain to New Jersey, but the arbitration is in London. No connection at all. The bill of lading failed to name the parties to the charter or its date and place of execution. Moreover, there was no indication in the bill that the charter contained an arbitration clause. First thing, there was incorporation clause of a charter was not there. Second, whether the charter had an arbitration clause was not there. The courts refused to enforce the arbitration clause against the plaintiff who was a stranger to the charter. This sent a warning to parties involved in international shipping. Arbitration, this of course I sell this if I am in an international arbitration meet or an international seminar relating to arbitration, because this really affects, because even as I told, maritime industry wants arbitration. They don't want to go to local courts to have it resolved. So this is one thing which in international shipping one has to look into. Arbitration and incorporation clauses in bill of lading should clearly identify the parties to a particular charter in order to be enforceable. And clauses that are ambiguous are always open invitations to litigation, which we want to avoid. But if it's giving us bread, butter, jam, honey, we will do it, right? So if there is, it all depends on which party we are representing and what the law says ultimately. We are not going to do anything which the law would not permit us to. And today we have all sounded as to what the law is. What is a bill of lading, whether it contains an incorporation clause, whether in the incorporation clause there is a charter party, whether the parties are aware of it, whether all the related facts with respect to that are available to the arbitrants or the parties who have suffered a loss. What are the other rules? I'll just run through this. The other rules in maritime is COGSA. This is what we say, Carriage of Goods by Sea Act. So every country has got a COGSA. Indian COGSA, UK COGSA, French COGSA. Each and every country has its own carriage of goods by sea rules, its own act through the parliament which is incorporated. So that would be applicable. And next is the Hague rules, Hague-Visby rules and the Hamburg rules. They are ranging from 1924, 68, 78. They're all very old laws, which still are applicable as of today with slight modifications. Basically, they give the basic, the mandatory, rudimentary prescriptions to the carriers. Like they can't just take somebody's cargo and lose it and say, look, I'm not responsible. So all these rules are more trader friendly, prescribing minimum restrictions and limitations with respect to how a cargo has to be handled. So it's in favor of the traders. Forum selection. So this is one particular aspect with respect to what kind of forum you need to select. And for arbitration, it can be, first thing is whether it is litigation or arbitration. When it comes to arbitration, whether it's got to be ad hoc, or whether it's going to be institutionalized, or whether it's going to be domestic or international. So forum selection is one important aspect. Forum non-convenience. This is a very important aspect where when there is going to be a favorable forum, and the parties go before a forum which is not favorable to the other party, the courts say, don't come here. Go to the forum which is more favorable. So this is forum non-convenience where the courts hold that don't come to me. This court, the other court, according to the clause, has got more jurisdiction, most likely it says an arbitration. So if there is an arbitration mentioned, they say don't come to court to litigate. There is a clause which is more favorable, go to arbitration. So this is called forum shopping. This is not going to Bangalore or T Nagar to go to the forum to shop. This is, we can talk of hours and hours together for this forum shopping. Okay. I think in the international law itself, forum shopping plays a very major role. But in general international commercial arbitrations, there are only two shops available, this forum or that forum, this law or that law. But with maritime, you got lots of forums. So different laws, different applicable, different jurisdiction, and what that particular arbitration law talks, whether courts can have jurisdiction or not, whether interim relief can be granted based on that particular act, what are the acts which are applicable. This is a maze, and we never will be able to give, how shall I put it, a cogent and a consistent opinion on these things, because law varies, and when law varies not just in India but internationally, so based on each and every decision which is passed in US, UK or European country or whatever it is, our opinions keep changing with respect to forum shopping. Despite the fact most of the countries adopt the UNCITRAL and have their laws relating to arbitration. This is something which we really have to study a lot. Then courts refusing jurisdiction. So courts, it's just not in India, but abroad also, most of the foreign jurisdictions, foreign courts, if there is arbitration or if there is no jurisdiction, they plainly reject an application at the earliest to say that this court has got no jurisdiction, go before the appropriate forum. But of course that must be a speaking order. As far as Indian courts are concerned, they use a discretion lot with respect to maritime. Anti-suit injunctions. So like sometimes the courts intervene in case the the parties would have to litigate in a particular court which has got the appropriate jurisdiction. Then the parties go to a different court. Then the Indian courts would intervene and grant anti-suit injunctions. That is, one cannot proceed with the suit, injunct themselves from proceeding with the suit. But of course, sometimes it can go along with discretionary. Not many courts pass anti-suit injunction orders. Then arbitration clauses. So how it is interpreted. In fact, so saddened we were, like there was one particular case about, it started in 2008. The parties, the Kerala lawyers had said, okay, you go litigate this issue. They filed the court fee for a heavy loss of their cargo. The opposite party filed a Section 8 application. It was rejected, against which they went to the Kerala High Court. That was also again rejected. In the meantime, they came to Madras High Court, invoked the arbitration clause, an arbitrator was appointed. The plaintiffs who filed the suit continued with the suit. Madras High Court appointed the arbitrator. Arbitrator wanted to continue with the arbitration because there was a time limit within which he can. All defenses were taken, but this party could not file their counterclaim in this arbitration because they can't proceed both suit and counterclaim. So they gave away that right and proceed with the arbitration under Section 16 for questioning the applicability of arbitration clause. In the meantime, the High Court of Kerala confirmed that there is no arbitration. Against this, they went on SLP. And finally, in SLP, orders were passed. The entire process took about, easily about 11 to 12 years. And we were one leg of that because we were the parties who represented the plaintiff in the arbitration, who under their instructions had said we are not participating, we are not filing a counterclaim because we already, ultimately the Supreme Court held arbitration is maintainable. Now after 11 years we are going right from day one. The first memo I filed in that arbitration was we had inadvertently said that we will not file a counterclaim because we had proceedings, so we might be permitted. Not that. By the time we came in the arbitration, we were the third advocates. So the initial advocate had not filed the counter properly, so additional counter, then counterclaim. No documents, because all the documents are in the subcourt. Most importantly, today the Supreme Court is passing the order. Yesterday, in subcourt Kochi, the judge reserved the case for judgment. So imagine the plight. What kind of advice can one give such a client to say whether arbitration is maintainable? But good, we are getting business, right? So we proceeded on. We always take everything in a very positive aspect. And the most important thing, like how Vijay says, this is the only profession where clients pay you the money so that you can learn. So we will take best advantage of learning the law at the client's expense, right? So now the opinion which we are giving, what more can we say after the Supreme Court says this is what it is? Okay, so next. Yeah, this is a very short, how the High Court's view. One of the negative things about this particular commission report is that though Indian courts feel like if there is going to be a foreign jurisdiction, go there, it's not actively felt by the foreign courts sometimes. So the UK and the US courts have sometimes, when they apply this FNC principle, foreign non-convenience, they do not apply the same principle on a very tangent point, like it takes time in Indian courts to resolve. So this is something which the Law Commission has taken into account. It's in 2003, but subsequently there have been a few court judgments where they have agreed to Indian jurisdiction, but predominantly this is how the foreign jurisdiction feel. That like how I usually tell my clients, what else to say, I just tell them the wheels of justice grind very slowly in India. But I don't want to repeat it, but sometimes it does happen. So this is one thing which negativates maritime. In fact, this was for a maritime arbitration training that they had taken this aspect, like whether India is a favorable forum for arbitration or not. So this was one seminar when I spoke. This is something which foreign jurisdiction should not, foreign courts should not consider. Whether they have to lay down the law. Whether it's an Indian law, it's an Indian law. It's going to take time, of course. That's the choice that they have because it cannot be chosen. Yeah. Indian perspective is that they take only two stage one. Whether there is an alternate competent forum which is appropriate. If that is there, Indian courts will never usurp the jurisdiction. Second is whether it is in the interest of justice to relegate the parties to an alternate forum. If it is a justice that they have to do it, we go by it. Next one. Next is the international perspective. US and UK courts traditionally recognize FNC, but they don't have any law, legislative backing for that. The courts generally evaluate whether a satisfactory alternate forum exists, which forum has a greater connection to the case, and factually analyze how the convenience of the alternate forum to one party weighs against the burden placed. Civil law countries, they do not recognize the doctrine of FNC. So primarily due to the lack of certainty of its application, discretionary power given. So what happens is that if they go to a foreign court, sometimes they are not very sure about it. They say Indian courts have jurisdiction, but I do not know how long that's going to take or whether Indian courts or arbitration, they are going to say whether it's arbitration or... so you have come to me, let me resolve it. So this is how that goes. Because ultimately, in the process, the parties come around for some settlement. In fact, we have about half a dozen cases like that, where we know the clients have bleeded a lot due to lapse of time. And still they'll have to, because naturally we can't be doing service, free service to them. In such cases, the first thing I will not talk like a lawyer, I will not talk like a person promoting arbitration, I will not talk like a conciliator or whatever. I will put myself into the shoes of my client. I say, have one round of settlement. Because that party is also going to spend, you're also going to spend. So if you can resolve it, have it resolved. Maybe I'm not bringing money to my coffers, but at least I'm holding my integrity. And I can feel, because I know the next time the client is going to come only to me if there's going to be a dispute. so either this way or that way. But ultimately as lawyers, what we have to do is know the law, see whether it is applicable, whether the clients would be getting justice in the course of time. let us say it's going to be something which is not, give them some good suggestion as to how the issues have to be resolved. But because ultimately, it's not that we are a litigation lawyer or arbitration lawyer or a conciliator, negotiator, blah, blah, blah. We are some persons who are sought by people who are suffering financially to have their issue resolved. So if that comes predominantly, I think that any opinion that you give or anything which you give in the process is going to benefit the party, and you have a, like, you know, permanent client. Once a client, always a client. No, ultimately this is correct, because you must know that you should not get clients only when they have a dispute. When they contract itself, they should come to you. Until now, not many contracting parties come to a lawyer to get the agreement. Always they come for a post-mortem job. After they have a dispute, after the party doesn't pay, the company who has to pay gets insolvent or bankrupt, and then they come. But when you come at an earlier stage, you can assist them in drafting. Yeah, we have what are the choice of law in maritime arbitration? Less maritime law. This is a general principle of maritime law. So what are the principles which are involved? Varies. A general average, collision, liens, maritime liens, claims, etc. All these things are general codes that we have in Lex Maritime. These are the principles where different codes have held in different way, but mostly they are common. Next is the 3Cs, codes, customs and conventions. So most of the decisions in arbitration and in litigation go by this. Lex Mercatoria, this general commercial law of a particular country, that also we know. It's favorable to the seller or the buyer, or what kind of law is applicable, what claims. They apply the aforesaid lex to settle disputes related to ship arrest, an attachment, theory of abandonment. Yeah, this is very interesting. Of course, we do deal with some commercial contracts, but it's more often in maritime law. You hold on to something only until you know you can hold it. Suppose the cost is going to be so prohibitive than the value of the cargo, no point in telling. No? It's not a spouse or it's not a child where you are stuck for life. You just have to abandon it. And the earliest point of time, abandon it. Never apply it to your friends, never apply it to your spouse or children. It's only for cargo. And maritime law of liens. So this is a topic by itself. General average, this is a very unique concept with respect to maritime law. It will take about a few hours, so we'll just leave it for the time being. Foreign non-convenience, general maintenance, general remedies and actions. So all these things, any law which is going to be laid down in maritime courts or maritime arbitrations are going to be based on all these things. Whether foreign non-convenience or foreign arbitration clause. So these are some of the key elements. Can I just rush through? Yeah. A desire to avoid multiplicity of proceedings and conflicting and confusing judgments. We need to take our stand. Each case to be decided on its facts and circumstances, like the economic strength of the parties, the expenses involved, applicability of evidence, very important, because we talk about whether the master gave a notice to protest or something like that. The master will be sailing for months together. You can never call him for evidence. So most of the time we take adjournment is because master is sailing here or there. Okay? So, and sometimes our masters don't understand that because they have to record evidence, you know. What is it? I am a master and I am staying from 9 to 5. Why is this master not coming for months together to India? So that's there. Then whether advantages in justice clearly outweigh proceedings before a court which in law has jurisdiction. So that is a very important thing. One court has got jurisdiction, but for convenience it might not be applicable. So what do you do? But another court having controlling jurisdiction is more natural, and the plaintiff is deliberately avoiding the set forum. So this usually happens. So a distinct disadvantage to deny the right of the plaintiff to decide his court. So the court, it's not like always they are plaintiff friendly. If suppose the plaintiff is trying to avoid a particular jurisdiction and going to the other country, because in maritime law you've got lots of part causes of action in so many places. So when there's going to be concurrent jurisdiction, what you choose on is something you choose. Balance of convenience is a material consideration, but not the sole criteria to justify. Balance of convenience, injunctions, applications. Okay, 1 minute on this. This is how we usually resolve. We know that we have a dispute, we need to resolve. Contract clauses have to be more precise. So we have jurisdiction, applicability, of the law, the time limitation, scope of carriage, whether there's going to be a subcontract, somebody else is going to do it, all properly clarified in the contract clauses. Resolution of disputes at the time of execution. So when we are going to execute a contract itself, how do we resolve the dispute that may arise? Gone are the days where we don't talk about negative things. We always talk about formation of contracts and signing of contracts. We don't talk about disputes in a contract. We have to discuss it. It's not marriage after all. No? Still we have not come to this prenuptial agreements in India. But if that comes, my God, we are going to have a source of revenue for lawyers. But that is something auspicious. We feel that marriages are made in heaven. So we don't want to cross that sacred line. But nothing so sacred about maritime contracts, please. Nothing so sacred to say we won't fight. We will fight. We are fighting. Let us resolve it. What if we are fighting? What do we want to resolve? So you just go quite clear at the time of entering into a contract. And let me tell you one thing. Of course, I read so many contracts. Ultimately, I say, if I put myself in your shoes, do this, that and all. So when it comes to they presenting a contract, vetting, ultimately some 10 different clauses vary. Then this goes on and on and on, I tell you. See, this 10 clauses, 7 clauses are not going to be applied at all. Such just not the way. Okay? Out of experience, I tell you, these 7 clauses are not going to cause any problem to you. 3 clauses, 1, 2, 3. Ultimately, there will be 1 clause with respect to dispute resolution. I say unless and until you give an okay to it, it's very difficult. That's when I, as a lawyer, can step in to advise the client to say, go for an institutionalized arbitration, go for this particular arbitrator, go for this particular trade and things like that. You understand? So, this is where when ultimately you know that there's going to be 1 clause which will definitely be invoked, and at the time of invoking you can't change things. Then it's the place for a lawyer to give them proper advice. Okay? So, and most importantly, if the dispute, the next thing I ask is, how much revenue are you going to get out of this contract? How many, if at all, how much would be the amount that would be, that one of you would be claiming against the other party? Because the guy who drafts the agreement to give it to you, he has got a verbose arbitration clause. Each to appoint an arbitrator, both arbitrators to appoint consumer partner, not even 5 lakhs or 10 lakhs will be the dispute. The 10 lakhs here, 2 arbitrators, presiding arbitrator. We are not going to agree for the arbitrators. We are going to go to court. Court is much more vigilant. It appoints 3 retired judges for this 10 lakhs. My God, we are going nowhere. This guy is not coming to me for vetting another agreement at all. So that's where I step in. The next question I ask is, as a commercial person, I know I'm a lawyer, I am not making money, or I don't know how you're making your money, but tell me, if at all there's going to be a dispute, how much lakhs are you going to? Because this is one aspect which today, as arbitrators or arbitrating parties, we need to know. Whether it's going to be a small claim, whether it's going to be an intermediary claim, or whether it's going to be a very big claim. Based on that, we need to have an arbitration clause. Okay? So that is one thing we need to look into. Next, strategy. So what kind, both to execute the contract, execute the work, and in case there is going to be a dispute, what would be the strategy? That is when negotiation and mediation and settlement or compromise comes. So you have a clause for negotiating in case there is going to be a dispute. That fails, go for a mediation. That's also food for us, right? And settlement and compromise, MOUs. So all these things, a lawyer can play a very important role. Then arbitration proceedings. You have an arbitration clause, go to the arbitrator, tribunal. If you have courts and litigation, interim relief in case it's maritime thing you need, or you need to have litigation at all because arbitration clause is not very clear. There also we have some. Right? So what to choose? If you have a contract to decide whether there's going to be an international arbitration for it, or whether we need to have an ad hoc arbitration, or whether there is a statutory arbitration, or whether we need to have a contractual arbitration. International arbitration, not much scope for us. Ad hoc, we can have it provided, most of the ad hoc arbitration goes before arbitrators who are in the trade. Because it's just one issue, 2 issues that they have. Ad hoc, they call for an arbitration, resolve it, and they continue with the contracts. Statutory, not much we can do about it. But this contractual arbitration is where we step in and say, have institutionalized arbitration or name an arbitrator who is very competent in that particular line to go about it. Next. First, before telling them what to choose, we must know what kind of options we can give them. That's more it. So what are the possible solutions? Just rough it. So this is the kind of document I get usually. Okay, I don't know how much ever. Forget the fact, because my son always tells me I'm not a very good photographer. Even if I can focus and take a pic of this, it is impossible for me to find out what is actually written. How much ever pixels you have, but this is what it is. Ultimately, we end up saying that, give me a readable copy. And that readable copy comes in grey or light yellow or light blue color. Okay, so this is how we do our business. Clear and unambiguous arbitration clause, of course, that's beneficial to everybody. Parties binding the arbitration clause this is very important. Whether you want to bind the consignee, whether you want to bind the ultimate endorsee, buyer of the cargo, agreements which bind. What are the agreements which will bind the parties? You need to tell. Because as I said, there will be several contracts, subcontracts involved. Possibility and exhausting alternate dispute resolution mechanism. Don't go to arbitration or litigation unless until you finish the earlier different modes of ADR. Scope and applicability. So what would be the scope? In case you go for an arbitration, what would be the scope? What is the possibility of a result? And what would be the applicable issues? Elaborate, leaving little role for speculation or interpretation. So we have to be very clear. We say it is brief, of course we know how it is, you know. It's like anything which is very direct, we don't like it. So we put it in all different terms, the same line being mentioned, but it's better you always have a clear clause, so there is a little scope for doubt. Favorable laws to the parties, educate them, tell them this is a favorable law, that is a favorable law, please do. Like sometimes I say Chennai is a favorable forum, because we are stationed here. So financials, what is involved? No, like if it's going to be financials, what kind of, ultimately what is the amount that one has to claim or whatever, execution possibilities. So where do you go for execution in case you get a favorable award? Consent awards. Ultimately you aim at a consent award. Even during arbitration you can have it resolved and both the parties can come into having a consent award passed by the tribunal. Thank you.